prediction. Now, this is not anti-drug or pro-drug, but he did say that the curious mindlessness that ultimately is created in a population as the result of continual absorption of drugs until it becomes a tradition has to be seen to be believed. And he said it's nothing like what the romanticist believes it's like. And he then made a prediction. He said, and this was some time ago he said this to me, I'll never forget it. He says, I predict that within a few short years that there will be a great importation of drugs into the Western world. He said, this will happen. And he made this statement to me well before the current drug problem was as extensive as it is. And he says there won't be anything that can be done about it. So because drugs are curiously attractive to certain people. By the way, speaking of the Chinese, may I go neatly into a commercial for the House of Chan? Curious juxtaposition, but if you're looking to get your kicks with great Chinese food, and it is possible at the House of Chan, I would suggest you find out about the place. The food is great. They've been there for 35 years, and they're at 7th Avenue and 52nd Street, which is about as convenient as you can get to Midtown Manhattan. In fact, it is Midtown Manhattan, and any time you're going to the theater, it's a good place to know about, because if you tell them before you sit down that you're going to the theater, they'll make sure you get your food in time, you're served, and you're out in time to make the curtain, whatever it is you're going to go to. This is the House of Chan. The food is great. They're open 7 days a week. They have a bar, and they do serve a much better than average martini, and it's at 7th Avenue at 52nd Street. House of Chan. Let's see. We also have, oh, yes, here's one of my did you ever get the prune monkey on your back, right? All right, a word from the California Prune Advisory Board.
2 cheeseburgers, well done. Hold the onions, hold the mayo, BLT and whole wheat toast, and 2 liverwursts on white.
Pardon me, ma'am. I'd like to have some dessert. What do you have?
Yeah, sure. We got apple, berry, cherry pie, cream puffs, cookie cups, rice pudding, bread pudding, vanilla, strawberry, chocolate, cheesecake, pound cake, a gooseberry surprise.
That's wonderful. I think I'll have some prunes.
Prunes? You want prunes?
Yes. I'd like to have a bowl of prunes.
Mention prunes, and people just naturally break up. Maybe they still don't know that pound for pound, prunes have more iron, niacin, and vitamin B2 than the 6 leading fresh fruits, and 8 times the vitamin A of the most popular fresh fruit. They're even good for your complexion. It's about time people gave another thought to the California prune. The funny fruit that does so much for you.
Look, I just want some prunes. Put them in a bag. I'll take them home.
I don't know what's funnier, the prune or the commercial. Let's see. We have prunes. We've done the House of Chan. How about a little quickie here for General Tire? And they have briefly this to say: when Detroit chooses a new tire for their cars, they don't just jump at the first tire that rolls by. No, sir. They look for durability, dependability, and a sexy thump when you kick it, and competitive prices. Thrown in quickly. It says, we can learn a lesson from them. General's dual steel radial tire was the first polyester and steel radial tire delivered to Detroit for original equipment. It was the first. It's the 40,000-mile dual steel radial. And it's available at your local General Tire headquarters. And let's see, who are we plugging today? In Greenwich, see Lou Glasso, State Line Tire, 468 West Putnam. Okay. And we have one final little dingy. It's a public service spot. Is it pro or con drugs? Well, let's listen.
New York's drug crisis is real. It affects all of us one way or another. We've got to do something. We've got to get the pusher off the street, get the junkie off the stuff. We've got to kill the monkey on our backs. Find out where to start. Call us at 868-0505. That's 212-868-0505. WOR Mines, New York.
Yeah, that's true, sort of. But, you what was that? WR Mines, New York, or Mines? Mines, New York. I see. Interesting. You mean we're merely a slave to New York? That's a sad thought. However, the facts of drugs, see, there's another problem. See, everybody wants to solve drugs. They all want to solve problems. But on the other hand, they want to do it by very, very, I suppose you might say, soft-footed means. Do you know that many countries, including China, by the way, today, has made the drug problem a real capital offense? I mean, a real one. There's very little sympathy for drug addicts in many of the countries that originally, in a sense, fostered them. And we're going through a period now where I guess we're caught between the devil of humaneness and the evil of the advancing drug problem, which is causing a great deal of fear in the cities all over the country. And no one quite knows what to do about it. On the one hand, there's a great clamoring to make it all legal. Just let them have it all, and then there won't be a problem. Of course, this is an old solving of many problems. Years ago, it was noted in many societies that the minute you had any kind of a problem that dealt with illegality or, let's say, antisocial behavior, you merely did away with the law, and then hence it wasn't an antisocial problem. The most interesting practitioners of that were the Nazis. But, yes, they were. So it's not as simple a problem as many people would lead you to believe. It's an ultimate thing that's going to involve a genuine overhauling of philosophies, one way or the other. Now, to give you an idea what kind of a problem it is, speaking of symbolic. Now, the symbolic drug talk. When I say symbolic, to me, a panel show on drugs is a symbolic thing. It has not much to do with either correcting drug problems or even making people alert to the problem. Because, unfortunately, talk rarely approaches the reality. This is the real problem. In other words, you can read all you want about sex. Anything you read is not at all like the real thing. You agree with that? Okay, well, let's face that truth then in other areas. Then anything you read about drugs has much to do with the actual reality. Now, most people I've found have not had any personal, real experience with the drug world. Now, I've lived in New York for some time, and I've lived right in the heart of Manhattan. I've lived, as a matter of fact, most of the time I've been in New York, I've lived in the Village, which has had for some time, going back many, many decades, it's had its share of drug addicts of one kind or another. It's an area that, due to the general tolerance of the atmosphere and so on, large numbers of people who, in one way or another, feel themselves outside the mainstream of society have drifted to stay and to live. So the drug problem is not new to the Village. I've seen it from the time I came here, and it's so common that you don't even pay much attention to it, really, any longer. It's there. You don't pay much attention to any more attention today to a guy who's bombed out of his skull, staggering along Greenwich Avenue, than a few years ago you would pay to a guy who was drunk, walking down the street. You just say, well, he's drunk, and that's it, and you walk on. It's a very common situation. Now, many people living in many, many small communities around America probably have never seen a man or a person of any type, man, woman, child, totally skulled out. Probably never seen it. And they wouldn't even know what to do with it if they saw it. And maybe this is part of the problem. They could very well be living with somebody who's been blowing his mind for years, and they don't recognize it. They just think that he's going through, quote, a phase. I've heard that said. Well, I've had some very personal experiences with drugs, and I don't often talk about them. For example, I will frankly say tonight, since this is the drug-oriented shows that we're doing on the station, I've had 3 personal friends die of overdoses. 3. And that's a lot of friends. Not many of us have that many friends, actually. But I've had 3 throughout the past 10 years who have gone that way. And the one thing I noticed about all 3, particularly one, who was a creative person. The other two were not necessarily, but this particular guy was creative, a good director, by the way, who directed television, directed movies, and was just on his way to really going big time in his field. In fact, he had just, to be honest with you, had just signed a major contract with Paramount Pictures to do a major feature. The people around him were not aware that he was a drug addict. Curiously enough, in fact, even the people within his company, he formed an intimate company that was very successful. And the people around him, all of whom were fairly hip, as hip as anybody is today, were not aware that this guy had been for at least 5 years on really the hard stuff. I mean, the ultimate hard stuff. And due to the fact he had a fairly good income, he was able to keep himself well supplied, and everything seemed to be going fine. Well, one night, I had suspected for some time that he was on drugs. And he never talked much about it, except, oddly enough, he was one of these people who continually vacillated between being very anti-drug in his talk to being extremely tolerant in his talk and maintaining that drugs were no more harmful than martinis. This is a standard cliche that people continually have. And it suffices, I suppose, if you don't know anything about drugs, nor martinis, you can accept this. But he was one of those guys. I mean, he was very vociferous, highly articulate, and curiously enough, one of his major contributions to the film world, and this was an odd coincidence, one of his major contributions to the film world was a film that got tremendous critical acclaim. As a matter of fact, was even nominated for an Academy Award, the specific work that he did on this film, that was a violently anti-drug film. Now, that's the kind of irony that you constantly run into in this curious world. As a matter of fact, this phenomenon has been noticed in many other areas. You'll find people who are violently against, we'll say, a sin. They may be violently against sin. They're the people often that are drawn most to it, and they're really against a flaw in their own character. This is why they make a great issue of publicly being against sin. Well, this guy was publicly on record against drugs. In fact, he was being used. This is the irony of it all. Due to the fact that he was so successful in this one film with his work, he was being used by many of the agencies which employ filmmakers to make films, anti-drug public service films. He was actually making these things. That's the irony of it all. Well, one night I was over in a restaurant here in New York, and I was having a meeting with him. In fact, we were talking about working on a film together. If you're curious how old this guy was at the time, he was 28. So we were about to have a meeting. Now, I hadn't seen him in several months. He'd gone out to Hollywood after having been in this area for some time. And we went out to... I went to this restaurant, which is in Midtown. And we were to meet at 7 o'clock. And I arrived about 7. I sat down, and I had a cup of coffee or something, and I waited and waited and waited. And there were a couple of other people with me. And time went by, and it's now 7:30, 7:45, and finally it's about 8 o'clock, and the people are getting a little restless, and we ordered dinner by that time, figured something happened. But I had my ideas. I didn't say much. And sure enough, about 8:15, after our meals had arrived, he came in and sat down and just sat very quietly, didn't say much, and seemed to be very preoccupied. Well, immediately, as soon as he sat down, I knew right away. And my friends, luckily, didn't. They just said, "Oh, how are you?" And finally he stayed just a short time and left. And one of them said, "Gee, it's strange. He was in an odd mood." And I said, "Yeah. Well, he's probably got a lot on his mind." Well, I knew at that point. Well, he left New York and went back to the coast. And it was one of those fantastic things that happen in your life occasionally. I flew out to the coast about 2 weeks later. I flew out on my own business. Matter of fact, I was a guest on the Steve Allen show. It's when I really flew out there. And I had notified him. I wrote him a note.